Hey everybody, welcome back. Hope you've had a great week. And yeah, going to be back to some more normal zero friction cycling information this week. Thank you to all who bore with me across the recent series. For as I covered in the preludes, a bunch of very important reasons as to why that has needed to be done. And there will be further episodes to come because there's still a bit to shake out about all that. But we'll be breaking that up a little bit with some just more normal content for the time. Today's mostly going to be a bit of a catch up with regards to the testing and data. So not only do we have, more tests to be able to update you with, and I've just been going through and updating all the extrapolations because it's been a while since I updated those. As I get more tests completed, then I'm able to, have more actual test data to improve the extrapolated data that is used for products that didn't make it that far into the test. So across the board, the data tables will just continue to get better accuracy, especially for products that at some point in the test needed to be stopped because they exceeded the wear allowance limit or it's just not feasible to continue. And we're using then extrapolated data to fill in the remaining test blocks. That gets more accurate the more tests that are completed. So I'll be able to run you through all of that, as well as there's a couple of other changes and things that need to happen around the ZFC data, which we'll take you through. But a couple of quick bits just before we get to the main theme of today. I do wish to cover off a couple of points quickly from the hybrid ceramic bearings video. And then just some quick low friction news as was sort of fairly normal before, and then we'll get into it. Alrighty, so I just wanted to cover off some of the, I'll call it input, but I think we have to use that term fairly loosely. Coming back with regards to the whole discussion of hybrid ceramic bearings versus steel. And this is important because when I make a video on what are the best hints and tips around bearings for you, that might be very handy for your own cycling, be it just racing, winter cycling, nice hacks and tips and upgrades. And as we go into the discussion then also around whether or not it's worth spending the big bucks on hybrid ceramic bearings versus just going quality steel. To actually have that discussion without people being triggered and putting a whole bunch of just really unhelpful comments on the video, I want to cover off these basics first. Now, if you haven't seen the previous video, or you don't want to spend about 50 minutes watching a video that goes into this in all the detail, the nuts and bolts are that obviously industry, many of the major manufacturers in the bearing space have been producing hybrid ceramic bearings for a long time. The major bearing manufacturers, and they're the same ones that are favoured by a prolific person in this space, are making claims around their own hybrid ceramic bearings that they have, aside from much greater efficiency versus steel. The key part that I want to focus on at the moment is that they claim much greater lifespan or bearing longevity. So first point number one, when we get feedback saying, look, ceramic balls, they're harder than steel. They're going to wear the steel racers rapidly because they're harder than the steel racers. So obviously the previous person's information around hybrid ceramic versus steel must be correct. You should be thinking, so rather than contacting me, you should be thinking, perhaps I need to contact the major bearing manufacturers and let them know that ceramic's harder than steel. Why are they making these bearings when the ceramic balls are just going to quickly wear the comparatively softer steel racers and be shit in no time? I mean, do you not think that the major bearing manufacturers are aware of the hardness of ceramic versus steel, are making steel racers that are suitable to run the ceramic balls, and that there is actually something behind their claims based on a lot of testing and industry use cases for the, that sit behind the claims of much greater lifespan for hybrid ceramic bearings versus steel? So obviously just going down that extraordinarily simplistic thought train, of ceramic harder, steel softer. Therefore, those bearings must be shite in every case and have a shite lifespan, just as per Hambini's testing data and video. Then have a little bit of a think deeper, and if you still arrive at your position on that, ceramic must chew out the steel races rather quickly, perhaps you'd want to have a look at those major bearing manufacturers like SKF and Schaeffler and pretty much all of them, and write to them and just let them know and see how you go there. I'm not making the bearings. I'm not a bearing manufacturer making claims that hybrid ceramic bearings are 3 to 4 times greater lifespan than quality steel. So, you're kind of having to go at the wrong person. I'm relaying to you the information from the major bearing manufacturers. All right, clarification point number 2. I just want to deal with the illogical comments around hybrid ceramic bearings are only suitable for high RPM applications. What do you think happens to the bearing if you spin it at 100 RPM versus, say, 10,000 RPM? That suddenly becomes a problem for the bearing. At the end of the day, what matters is the load rating that bearing is experiencing versus its dynamic load rating, because that is going to determine how many cycles that bearing is going to be able to survive or effectively last before it starts to wear and become an issue. Quite simply, you're going to get many, many, many more hours of service life if you are spinning that bearing at 100 RPM versus if you are spinning that bearing at 10,000 RPM, because obviously you're going to use up your life cycle faster at higher RPM. So what's much more accurate to say, or it's actually accurate to say, is that the key advantages of hybrid ceramic bearings, such as their greater efficiency and greater wear life, are much more easily observed and seen, and also tested and studies done in industry tests for machines that are clocking up those cycles at a much faster rate versus a low RPM rate. So the takeaway is the advantages for hybrid ceramic are more easily determined and seen, and more quickly so at high RPM than they will be at low RPM, where some of those advantages, such as the greater efficiency, are going to be lesser because of the lower speed. But in terms of lifespan, a whole bunch of other factors are going to come into play when we look at cycling versus industry. But just for a flat-out statement of they're not suitable, or they're only suitable for high RPM, it's just nonsensical. What do you think happens to the bearing if, same versus same reload rating, if it's being spun at 100 versus it being spun at 10,000? It suddenly doesn't have a problem being spun at 100. It is fine. It's just going to take a lot longer to wear out because it's only being spun at 100. All right, last clarification on this before we move on to the main topics today. Yes, obviously things are different with cycling versus industry. And the concerns around shock and vibration having an impact on hybrid ceramic bearing life, or potentially making hybrid ceramic bearings unsuitable for cycling, that at the end of the day, that's the big thing that we need to, solve and get to. Now, what I want to present to you, or what we need to get to the bottom of, and we obviously need Mr. Hambini's help to do this. Let's just quickly have a look at his graph again. 1,000-kilometer cycling test, which, again, we have absolutely no idea how this bearing test was conducted. You can see that basically at about the 1,000-kilometer mark, the hybrid ceramic bearing is now on par, or just getting to the point where it is now starting to increase in its friction losses versus quality steel, which remain almost flatline, and that it increases by pretty much around 200% in friction losses from its baseline over that 10,000 kilometer cycling test, while the quality steel remains pretty well unperturbed. Now, just remember, so if you didn't see last week's video, the recap is I presented to you some pretty rock solid information from industry that the hybrid ceramic bearings have around a 3 to 4 times lifespan increase over quality steel. So what is happening in this test that has taken a bearing that should have around a 3 to 4 times greater wear lifespan, and basically taking it all the way to around an effective lifespan of, say, 1/10 that of quality steel. That would have to be some pretty spectacularly rough conditions from a shock and vibration and who knows what else being introduced there to take a bearing that in its basic state is going to be expected to be around 3 to 4 times greater lifespan, by being the fact that it's a hybrid ceramic bearing, to 1/10 the effective lifespan versus quality steel. And that, conditions that would induce such in a hybrid ceramic bearing, to take it from 3 to 4 times to say 1/10, are having no impact in a negative way at all on the steel bearings. So just as part one, that absolutely beggars belief, and obviously that's just one small part of the myriad of reasons of why it's nuts that this testing testing protocol is secret. Another part to this is obviously these bearings, this was a bottom bracket bearing test. The level of shock and vibration in your bottom bracket bearings, it's a much easier time than the shock and vibration that is occurring in, for instance, your bearings in your wheel hubs. And also the bearings in your bottom bracket are typically going to be much larger and have much greater load ratings versus what can be very small bearings in some wheel hubs, especially the more aero, say, front wheel hubs, where we might only be running a 6802 size bearing, which is really small, and it's being subjected to quite a lot of shock and vibration. So what we've seen over a decade plus of cycling is that the high-end hybrid ceramic bearings are delivering superior lifespan in cycling in wheel hubs despite all the shock and vibration and despite the small bearing size. So we have to factor that when we look at bottom bracket bearings, which are typically quite big and much more insulated from the shock and vibration, which is the big claim as to what makes hybrid ceramic unsuitable. So when we factor those points in, what on earth in this test possibly impacted the hybrid ceramic bearing such in that bottom bracket test to take it from where it would be if that bearing was running in a motor to what occurred in Hambini's bottom bracket test? None of that makes any sense on any level, and the only person who can clarify that and make it make sense is Hambini by releasing the test protocol so that we can understand it. So I hope that overall these 3 points just help clarify or summarize some of the key bits from last week's video, or the last video I did. And if you want the full deep dive for the information that substantiates hybrid ceramic bearing lifespan and the fact that manufacturers know how to make them, then the full detail video is there for you to watch. The last bit on this subject is I want to say that if you're going to actually have input, because a number of the people I can see are very, very clearly just blind sycophants of the other party involved, and I think 99.9% have not even watched a minute of the video and then providing input. Honestly, to me, it's just so nonsensical to do that. If you're going to want to have input, and I want the comment section on my vids to be a place of good discussion, good feedback, criticism, counterpoints, you can't do that if you haven't actually taken on board any of the information that's going against a belief that you might hold just because you hold somebody in your head in high esteem, and you're just ignoring any information that is perhaps shining a different light on that. So just give yourself, myself, and everybody else in the comment section the basic respect to actually take on board the information from both sides, and then make an intelligent feedback or criticism or critique or other things for me to have a look into and think about, rather than just a lot of the stuff that came through on the last one, which was, as I've clarified here, fairly nonsensical. Alrighty, let's rip into the low friction news before we get to the main topic of today. So firstly, just to let you know, we're still trying to follow up with SRAM with regards to their 0.8% chain wear tool and replacement recommendation, and the myriad of concerns that we have around that. I am still trying to get someone to respond, and I think it's very poor that they just aren't. We're still obviously chasing up a bunch of avenues around the Finish Line Halo product, so I'll give a deeper update around that in a future vid. Just know that, yeah, obviously they still need to be retested, so I will be getting more of those products in to test when I can. And there will be more information coming from the samples that were sent off to the university to do some fancy testing in America. It is going to be quite interesting, and I think it's going to, help answer, or I guess confirm, a bunch of concerns that I have in general about using industry standards tests versus testing a product in its actual use case. I know that Finish Line, they said on the call that I had with them, that they use 4 industry standards tests as part of a product's, I guess, development and assessment. And it's quite possible that from those industry standard tests that Finish Line really thought they were on a winning product. But if those tests do not mimic in any way at all what the lubricant is going to need to do in its actual use case, surprises can come up. The short version is from that testing in America, was that the Halo wax and the Halo drip wax were one of the best products I'd seen at really high RPM and a really low load, but one of the worst that they'd seen at really, I guess, low RPM and high load, much more in line with what's going to happen on a bicycle chain in cycling. So I don't have the graphs that I can show and further detail on that yet, because all this sort of testing and data is part of this person at the university's PhD. So it's going to be post their PhD, which is not too far away, or completion of that I think I'll have access to be able to put up a whole bunch of fun stuff and go through it. But that's kind of where we're at the moment. And when I get to retest, I think is when I'll talk about Finish Line next. Oh, and just while I remember, I've only had one anecdotal, use case come back so far. So a person using the Finish Line immersive wax, and they reported that, it ate the bejesus out of their chain in, I think it was 750 kilometers. So that's a pretty good match for the ZFC test here. That's only n equals 1 at the moment, so I would love to get more real-world use data and information back. If you are using Finish Line Halo wax, so the immersive wax, the wax strip, or even the wet lube, please track your kilometers and wear rate and let me know. Because, aside from all the stuff we have around the testing side of things, we still can't escape the fact that their main marketing claim for this product lineup, basically being that it includes micron size proprietary hollow tungsten spheres. The whole claim and everything around that is utterly bonkers. It does not match any logic or physics. Again, the short version of that is that if they are strong enough to remain spherical and hollow at micron scale, they do not act like ball bearings. They are going to act like industrial diamonds cutting into your chain. So, and we could not get to the bottom or any understanding of how they could possibly include such particles without them being abrasive. I can't think of a more abrasive thing to really add to your lubricant than doing that. And, whilst we've got a ways to go, we have by far the most abrasive product or highest wearing product that we've ever tested here by some margin. So the whole thing with this product lineup is, in the ZFC testing landscape, beyond fascinating. So if you're using it, please let me know how it's going for you. Lastly, thank you to follower Glenn, who put me onto the oil and grease detecting powder. So that is going to enable me to finally get back to assessing the fancy chain cleaning products or chain prep products such as Silka Stripper, Ceramic Speed's Drivetrain Clean. You may recall I did embark on that project a while ago, looking to use the test machines and the wear correlation, theory being that we would see a difference if these products didn't prep the chain properly for immersive waxing. Problem with that approach, it turned out to be flawed because obviously if it doesn't properly clean off factory grease is still a lubricant, so trying to then do that by wear correlation, it was just too muddied by that. So I've wanted to go with just a really objective, hopefully very visual outcome approach where I can really put these products to the test, so I can use one of these to see what they look like new, which it should highlight it pretty well, being that the chain will be coated with factory grease. Clean a chain with, say, Silka Stripper as per the instructions for that product, and then recheck for factory grease with this product, hoping that if there is any there, that this is going to highlight it. Obviously, we'll be able to do just externally first, and then take a link apart and and apply it on the parts inside the chain. And then, as these fancy chain cleaning or chain prep products do claim to be able to absorb the factory grease or remove the factory grease from a number of chains per 200 mil, then we'll be able to repeat that on multiple chains through each of those, and hopefully this is going to be what we need to really assess the product claims versus reality. So fingers crossed for this. I've ordered 4 bottles of it, so I've got a whole bunch, and I'm really hoping I'll have a chance to play between now and next week, and that it works and it's nicely objective and visual. And if it is, I'll have some fun things then to update. Alrighty, it has been a little while, but obviously whilst all the other fun has been going on, the core work at ZSC doesn't stop. So I missed it in the last sort of series of vids going on at the time, but we have actually clocked past 500,000 kilometers of control testing since I started ZFC. So yeah, it's taken basically 8 years to clock over 500,000 kilometers across the test machines. But that's, a bit of a milestone, and I will hopefully make it to 1 million if I'm able to keep on doing this for a little bit yet. So what it means is soon I'm going to do the 3rd update to the key learnings from all the lubricant testing that we've been doing. But for the moment, I'm just going to, I'll take you through to the raw data, talk you through the updates to the data since we last covered this, as well as its impact on a couple of fronts, which are going to need to see some changes. All right, so the first thing or change that you'll see is that a bunch of extra tests have popped in, just being called private tests. So where feasible, private tests that have been conducted, if they are basically a commercial product, then I'm including them in the results. If they are a product that is in development, quite a lot of those tests, the tests really aren't or haven't gone great, and I don't think it's representative to the data table and to the averages that we get from the data table to include tests where I don't even know often what stage of development that is, or if it's just a base before they put any friction modifiers in. Things like that. So they're not, a lot of the development tests are just not representative results. So I haven't included those. But where you see, say private wax drip, then it's literally just a private test for a wax drip lubricant that, due to the results, the manufacturer hasn't been happy enough for those results to be made public. But by calling it private, no one knows what it is. Then I think it's time we started putting these into the overall data table to flesh this out a bit. Plus, it gives us more data that we can use to improve our averages and extrapolations. Important part is that, so you see here in any of the blocks that are highlighted red, that means that extrapolated data is being used. This is not an actual tested result. So the test has been stopped, usually because it has exceeded the wear allowance, which is basically 0.5% wear mark, or recommended wear mark for the chain, which is 100% wear. Sometimes we do push on through, and often I won't. There can be issues, especially if products are performing poorly, and performing poorly early and are exceeding the wear rate limit. Aside from the fact that it's a waste of resources to keep testing a really poor product, things sometimes do get exciting where there can be so much chain suck and just running terribly that I have had where rear mech hangers have snapped, and it all gets a bit exciting. So I try to avoid that because it can just mean a whole bunch of time to get things sorted out again. So yeah, there are times when we do push on, times when we don't. The short version is if you see a red block, then I am using extrapolated data. Now, pretty much each year I update these extrapolations. So what I use for extrapolated data is data from tests that have been completed to a certain point. So for instance, if I am extrapolating data for block 4 for wet lubricants, then I'm getting, I guess, the data from all wet lubricants that have actually been tested in block 4, and I'm using that average. So the extrapolations are actually quite kind to the, the wear rate that's going or being put in for the lubricants that didn't make it that far into the test, because I'm using data from lubricants that did go that far into the test and using that average to basically extrapolate out and adding that on. So in short, if we have a look at, say, block 4 for wet lubricants, the average, what I'm doing, because block 4 is a contamination block, so that's a wet contamination block. Block 2 is the dry contamination block. I have a look at what the block 2 wear rate result is, and then I have a look at what the average wear rate result is for all wet lubricants that have actually been tested in block 4. So I can see that in block 2, they achieved a 53.1% wear result, and in block 4, the average for all wet lubricants tested is 79.2%. That means we've got a 26.1% increase in the performance for wet lubricants in block 4, which is the wet contamination, versus block 2. So I'm applying that 26.1% extrapolation onto the block 2 result for the lubricants that were not tested in block 4. So we can see there, say for Presta Cycle 1, that is the extrapolation that has been added on to its block 2 result to get its block 4 result. Similarly for block 3, we're looking at, for the lubricants that have been tested, what's the average reduction in wear rate in block 3 when we stop adding contamination versus the contamination block 2, and that's at minus 14.3%. So that extrapolation is applied to lubricants that didn't even make it to block 3. I'm applying that average reduction in wear rate extrapolation to their results. So in a nutshell, that all continues. You'll be able to see that. This will be uploaded onto the website hopefully by the weekend with the updated extrapolations, and you can see how all of that works. Where this gets fun, apart from the fact that it's always going to be a bit of fun using extrapolated data in any case. So as I update all the figures in red here, block by block, that obviously then means I need to update all the cumulative wear rate figures as well for those same lubricants. So basically all these blocks in red have had to be updated based on all of the blocks in red here that have been updated based on improved extrapolation data from more tests being completed. So this part in itself, that's great and groovy that we get to, I guess, increase the accuracy each year. However, as it is we use sort of the block 5. We use block 5 as well as block 2 and block 4 when we do the cost to run modeling for the different cycling demographics. As those figures change, then the cost to run modeling also changes, and that already is very clunky, and it's reached a point where it's just not feasible to update the cost to run modeling as it is each year based on these figures changing, which do impact obviously how those calculations. So if a lubricant improves or gets a result that is now worse than what it had previously in its wear rates in block 4 and for the end of the main test, then its cost to run will obviously follow on from that. So there's going to be bigger changes around cost to run, which I'll talk through probably next week, I think, in the low friction updates. But just note that at the moment, I guess cost to run figures are not going to match this, and that work needs to be done on that front to move to a different system. The updated data, let's have a bit of a look at, I guess, just the average performance by lubricant type. So just having a look, starting with the, recap, what these percentages mean. The recommended replacement mark for a chain is at 0.5% elongation wear. So that 0.5% wear mark equals 100%. So if something was to be 100% here, then that means that we have used all of the recommended wear allowance for the chain, and that's the wear allowance used for the test. So we can see that immersive wax is at 2.7% for the first 1,000 kilometer block. So that's the average of all immersive waxes tested. So that is extremely low, obviously very close to 0%. The average for wax drip lubricants in the first 1,000 kilometer block 1 is 12.9%. The average for wet lubricants is pretty darn close at 13.4%. And the average of all lubricants tested is at 10.8%. So what this basically tells you is that if things were to continue being just run in a perfectly clean environment, that on average, out of all the lubricants tested, it would really take us around 10,000 kilometers to reach the wear rate limits for the chain. However, as it is not a clean test, in Block 2, for this 1,000 kilometers, there are points throughout this test block where we are adding abrasive dry contamination. And things do change a fair bit. The immersive wax wear rate for this block is 6.6%. The wax drip lubricant for this block is 9.7%, which again, there is no cleaning through the main test. So that is still a very impressively low wear rate across that block. And wet lubricants, surprise, surprise, this is where things start to really change because, would you know it, contamination sticks on contact to something that is wet, and also the fact that it is wet, it provides the contamination a pathway to transport from outside the chain to inside the chain, whereas something stuck on a solid or semi-solid wax is pretty well stuck on the outside and does not have a pathway to get inside. Average for all lubricants tested through Block 2 is 33.7%. So on average across all lubricants tested, if we just were testing across this block, if that was your writing, then chains would reach their recommended wear replacement mark in, say, around 3,000 kilometers. Block 3, one of the main claims that all lubricants have is that they, clean as they lubricate or something along those lines. So this kind of puts that to the test. Block 3 is a no contamination block, so we have stopped adding the contamination we did in Block 2, and we're seeing if the lubricant is able to reduce its wear rate notably once we've stopped doing that. And in general, we don't see much of that occur. Not a surprise, because remember that on a typical relubrication, you are putting, say, around 3 mil of lubricant onto your chain, and your chain is going to be over 100 links long. So call it around 0.03 of a mil of lubricant per link going onto your chain. There's just only so much flush cleaning that amount can do. Even if you're putting, some lubricants are a pretty heavy application, even if you're putting 10 mil, which is a really heavy application of lube onto your chain, that's still 0.1 of a mil per link. And there's just only so much that can do, as opposed to obviously intervening with a proper solvent flush clean. So we can see that immersive wax reduced the wear rate from 6.6% down to 3.5%. Wax drip reduced from 9.7% down to 6.9%. Wet lubricants reduced from 53.1 down to 47.4%. And the average of all lubricants reduced from 33.7 down to 28.4%. So just, overall, clean as lube is not that much of a thing. Everything gets really harsh in Block 4. That's the wet contamination block. This is a tough test for pretty much all products, even some of the immersive waxes. So the average for all immersive waxes tested is 26.5% wear rate. The average for wax drips, still a really impressive 41.6%. Average for wet lubricants, still not so great, 82%. So remember, 100% equals your entire chain wear allowance. So we're getting fairly close to just using up an entire chain in terms of its wear allowance just in this 1,000 kilometer test block. and the average overall is 59.2%. So yeah, if one was to be, I guess, using the average of all lubricants tested to date, we're really looking at about sort of 1,600 kilometers lifespan if we were just to test this block. Just an update overall, when we put all 6 test blocks together, now a reminder that especially for a lot of the wet lubricants, we are using extrapolated data to a fairly high degree, and that extrapolation data, it all adds up to be not that pretty. By the end of the full 6,000 kilometer test that we have, which includes the dry contamination, the wet contamination block 4, and extreme contamination block 6, average for the immersive waxes is 86.6%, so they still haven't, on average, reached their wear rate limit by the end of a very harsh test. Wax drips, still overall a very impressive 148.2%. Wet drip lubricants, not so good at 368.7%, and that obviously drags up the average of all quite a bit to be 248.9%. So basically on average, to get through the ZFC main tests, we would need to use 2.5 chains, or use 1 chain to an average of 2.5 times its recommended wear allowance. So it gives you, I think, a pretty strong indication as to just how tough the test protocol is and how big a test for the lubricants that we're putting through this test. It really highlights if they're going to work in the real world or not work in the real world. When we have a look back at, I guess, some of the raw data, if we have a look at the cumulative wear, sorry, let me just re-expand this table out. Look at the cumulative wear, so all the blocks added up together. If I sort that by block 6 extreme, if my computer will play ball, we can see that mostly the immersive waxes are making it through to the end of the test. Some of them, we have actually used extrapolated data that at the end of the day, the tests were stopped early for some based on manufacturer requests because they weren't happy with how it was going, or as happy. We can see that some wax drips have made it all the way through to the end of block 6. They have exceeded their wear allowance by the time they've got there, but they've been strong enough by the end of block 5 to keep on going and push through to the end of block 6. But as we get further down, we can start to see that obviously we are using a lot of extrapolated data, and for some of the poor performing products, oops, I've done a typo there. I'll fix that before I upload. We can see that the numbers get pretty crazy. So it's just extrapolation on extrapolation. So I can't give you a strong testament as to, if I did actually test one of these all the way through to the end of block 6 without it destroying the test machine, as to how close it would get to this number. But to be honest, I'm not that fussed as to how accurate some of these are, because they're simply such a poor performing product. You shouldn't be using them anyway. And whether it is just horrifically bad or just really, really, really bad, I don't think should be that much of an issue that we lose sleep about. Don't use them. Right, next week I'll give some more updates with regards to where I'm at with testing and testing coming up, because far out the testing side is just so booked, but there's a bunch of stuff that I do want to get to of open public sort of test interest, so we'll talk more around that. I'm going to call it here because I want this video to finish with a 3 still on the timestamp instead of going over into the 4. So more next week. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you for watching this if you did. Remember to please subscribe if you wish to support the work that we're doing here. And have a great weekend of cycling. I will catch you on the next one.